right, this is exciting. Hello, and welcome to our first episode of The Overanalysts. Today with me is Brady, the Overanalyst, Mate, also known as Potato, and me, Seth, the Overwitch. All three of us are Twitch streamers, very passionate about video games, and we think that we can share something with the world. So let us start, I guess.
Yes.
Hello.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our inaugural episode. I'm so glad to have all of you here. And goodness gracious, we certainly picked a hell of a topic for today's episode.
Yeah, Cyberpunk, a game that everyone and their grandma was waiting for ages.
The problems we're going to have as we break this down are the simple fact that the game's expectations as they were established by the studio and then kind of taken and run with by an extremely zealous community just weren't borne out. But I think it's important to remember that this, despite CDPR, the development house's reputation, this wasn't like a game made by a long-established AAA studio that had a track record of knocking things out of the park. Specifically, well, let me ask you guys: can you think of a single game that was developed by CD Projekt Red that wasn't related to The Witcher?
Nope.
That's because, to the best of my knowledge, there aren't any.
I just know that they spent a lot of time also developing a Steam competitor, GOG.
So CD Projekt, not CD Projekt Red, the parent company, was founded all the way back in 1994 by a gentleman named Marcin Iwinski and Michal Kaczynski. Marcin Iwinski, you guys may be familiar with, as his name has adorned many of the now infamous yellow apology tweets sent out by CDPR.
Oh, yes.
I don't think Mr. Kaczynski was directly involved with any communications regarding the game. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. So they were founded in 94, and they specialized in a service, I think, that's pretty essential in that part of the world, translating and localizing software, particularly like PC games, for a hungry, like, Polish market. They worked with, I think it was Interplay, localizing Baldur's Gate, right?
Yep.
And I didn't dig up a ton of information on this, but I do know they had planned to, I believe, port Baldur's Gate Dark Ascension or something like that. And that project fell through. So good luck them. They launched their own development company almost a decade after founding in 2002. This is CD Projekt Red, the kind of mid-range dev darling of the video game community, like the hardcore gaming community, that for the vast majority of their existence worked, almost exclusively on PC games, and completely exclusively on games related to the Witcher franchise, based on very, very popular fantasy novels. That the first Witcher game would not be established until 5 years after CDPR was founded in 2007. So that was their first project. And, clearly then they spent a lot of time not just laying the groundwork for the company, but really pouring their hearts and souls into the first Witcher RPG, which was a PC exclusive, but received insanely well by the standards of the time. I've not played a lot of The Witcher, like the first one, just a little tiny bit. But do either of you guys have a lot of experience with it? I've heard it's clunky, but like phenomenally well crafted from a narrative perspective.
Oh,
The
definitely.
first one was horrendous when it came out. It had a lot of bugs, a lot of wasn't that, nice to play. But through
Okay.
the span of, I think, a year, they managed to patch most things out, add a lot of quality of life improvements. They released, I think, I don't remember what the exact edition was called, but they put it all into one edition, and then they re-released the whole game, and the game
Yeah.
was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I played it, unfortunately not when it released, so I didn't have that experience. I played it, I think, about 2 years ago, because I was curious. So I played Witcher 2, I played Witcher 3, and I was like, okay, maybe I should try Witcher 1 as well, just to see how it all started. And I gotta say, the game did not age well. at all.
Yeah,
So I would not recommend it to anyone.
that's what I've heard. Like great storytelling, but like the systems, especially those surrounding combat, are really clunky. That's my
Yeah.
my understanding. But hey, 2007, if you remember the state of like PC RPGs at that time, it was surprisingly large, and to my knowledge, like especially after the fixes that we mentioned a moment ago, received very, very, very warmly by like that core audience of PC RPG gamers who, you know, people who've been playing since games like Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale in the 90s, were used to games, right? I think that were probably a little bit on the clunky side mechanically, but had really rich narratives. They followed up The Witcher with a sequel, Assassins of Kings, in 2011, which did receive a console launch, I believe only on Xbox 360, as well as, of course, on the PC. And I want to say Witcher 2 was a smaller game, but one with a pretty well crafted branching storyline that had effectively two totally different mid games, depending on which faction or allies you chose, and that was considered to be much more accessible than the first game. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. They like decided, I guess, smaller would be better, not to overextend themselves.
Almost like there might be less in there.
Yeah, exactly. The story was actually well made. The only problem that people had was that it seemed a little bit too linear.
Which served the narrative at least fairly well, and I know for a fact Assassins of Kings is remembered extremely fondly by those who managed to get their hands on a copy to this day. I know like next to nothing about this, but I also saw in 2014 they released like a Witcher adventure game. The adventure game, whatever it was, I guess, immediately got snowed under by The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, which dropped in 2015 on PC, as well as, I want to say, just 8th generation consoles. Kind of a bit of a pattern here. The Witcher 3 launched in a relatively abysmal state on consoles. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but it wasn't as bad as Witcher 1 was on release or as today's game was, like, at all thus far. But I remember distinctly, as somebody who got Witcher 3 near release, like, the UI on console was really, really Byzantine. There were a lot of graphical glitches and stuttering. The game just wasn't optimized very well.
Yeah, that does tend to happen a lot with any game that's released on both PC and console.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that surprising, but it wasn't as terrible, like you said, as the Cyberpunk release
No,
was.
no, and they tuned it up extremely quickly. I remember going back to Witcher 3 after it didn't really capture my attention the first time, maybe a few months, half a year later, and it played like a dream. All of the menus and like little HUD elements were far easier to navigate and use. And the game was expanded significantly after launch with the addition of numerous totally free DLC sets of weapons and armor and little side quests and things like that. It seemed like the developers really cared about what they were doing and wanted to drip feed new content to players, even those who didn't necessarily want to shell out for it. The overall quality of Witcher 3, I think, is what earned CDPR such a cult following, right?
And let's not forget about the DLCs that they released afterwards. They were so cheap compared to anything else, but the amount of content and the amount of storytelling that you receive through it is basically a standalone game.
Yeah, that's correct. Hearts of Stone was released, I want to say, very late 2015 for, I think it launched for like 10 or 15 bucks US and contained a ridiculous amount of content, as well as, I would argue, probably the tightest, most well-conveyed narrative in a console RPG I'd seen to that point. And Blood and Wine dropped in 2016 for, I want to say, $30, right? And it contained basically an entire new game.
They released the entire new continent, along with improving the cinematics. I don't know if you've noticed, but the cinematics became much more dynamic.
Yep. So I want us to keep those DLC especially in mind because I think they collectively represent probably the best work that I've seen from that studio to date, right? When it comes to storytelling, when it comes to mechanics, they're big enough to show you what the team can do, but not so big that you become lost in it. And I think that's pretty important to keep in mind as we continue barreling towards the train wreck at the end of the line. Oh yeah, Witcher 3 also introduced, this is incredible for like any RPG, a mini game that didn't suck.
Yeah.
It included a
Oh
simple
yes.
card game emulating, like, I suppose, like battles between different armies called Gwent, which was extremely simple to pick up and play, which allowed players to construct decks from cards they would earn from regular NPCs. Like, I think almost every shopkeeper in the game plays Gwent, as well as
Yeah.
special characters like story significant characters you meet throughout the campaign. And Gwent, I say this as somebody who's not overly fond of mini games in these types of games usually. Gwent is addictive as all get out.
Oh yes. Basically, it has that trading card game feeling.
Yeah, which is why they managed to actually release it as a standalone game.
Yep. Which, if I remember correctly, I played Gwent, which dropped in 2016, the same year as Blood and Wine, and I didn't really care for the standalone version near as much as the one that was present in the game.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, it wasn't like it didn't have enough, like, I guess, content or playability as a standalone game.
It got patched quite a lot afterwards. I did try it out, I think, a couple of months ago. The only problem that I have with it now is that the game does not resemble Gwent from Witcher 3 at all anymore. Now it's much more complicated. All the cards that you know from the is are not don't have the same effects, so they added quite a lot. But I think they must have done that because otherwise the playability was not as good for a standalone game as it is right now.
And did it feel overcomplicated then as a result of all the new rules and things being added? Because I felt like one of the things that made Gwent so digestible and inoffensive in Witcher 3 was the fact that there was this level of strategic depth to it, but it was incredibly easy to understand and use at a fundamental level.
Yeah, I mean, that is exactly the reason why I enjoyed Gwent in Witcher 3, but gotta be honest, like they added quite a few levels of strategy thinking with the updates to Gwent. However, I am the type of person who like I don't like chess or games that
Right.
require quite a lot of thinking ahead. So for me, I just played a couple of rounds and I realized that's not my game.
Yeah.
And that was it.
No, that's an interesting point as well, Seth, because I think one of the things that set Gwent apart in that regard was that it was a game largely about reaction instead of planning ahead and acting, trying to fence your opponent in. You were always like having to adjust to whatever card they placed down or whatever effect they activated. A very good, very robust little game. But our impressions aside, the Gwent standalone game, with its microtransactions, because of course, has been doing fairly well, like really well since launch.
That's true.
Thronebreaker, the game that you referenced earlier, was released in 2018, and it is an adventure game set in the world of The Witcher that uses a unique card-based battle format that isn't Gwent, even though it's clearly Gwent. And to the best of my knowledge, it was also received fairly warmly.
Yeah, as mostly because people were just hungry for more Witcher.
Of course.
Yeah.
Oh, which they're going to get because, like cue ominous strings, in 2018, late 2018, CD Projekt established a small mobile game branch studio called Spoko, which is currently working on a mobile title called, I think, like The Witcher Monster Slayer. So, get ready to pay out the nose for those decoctions, kids.
Yeah, so the thing about that is one of the reasons why I had so much respect for CD Projekt Red is that they openly stated that Witcher 3 was going to be the last Witcher game. But what I'm assuming they meant is it's gonna be the last canon Witcher game.
Or the last game based around Geralt, anyway.
Exactly. So I guess they still want to expand on the Witcher universe because it's making them money.
Right,
So,
they want
why not?
they want to expand on that bank account.
Exactly. So I don't blame them. Like for a game development studio, that's quite important. I mean, it's a business after all. But the Witcher as a character, like Geralt as a character, he doesn't have that much else to go on. So his story is finished.
No, I mean you killed almost everything in the world at the end of Witcher 3 by the end of Witcher 3. So
Yeah, still, I don't know. They're on good terms with the original writer now, and
You mean they're not in a lawsuit anymore?
Well, yeah, and they paid him a lot of money, and he's also working with them on the Netflix show. So I kind of have a feeling that they're like, even though they said it, there's still a possibility of us seeing more of Geralt in a future game. Not anytime soon, though.
I'm assuming that the mobile game that they're planning to make is going to be based on the short stories about The Witcher. I think that was the first book that was released, so it
Yeah.
didn't have any sort of major storyline. It was just a collection of, let's say, bedtime stories about how Geralt is going around and doing bounty missions.
I feel like it's gonna be based around just making money of those microtransactions.
Agreed. I mean, but one thing I want us to keep in mind, because this is so important to the story, is largely, I would argue, almost entirely due to the reputation of the GOG storefront, which is well renowned for not only providing quality of life improvements and access to old games that wouldn't normally work on a lot of contemporary hardware, but also making a name for itself as like a DRM free service, more or less ensures that customers own what they buy, right? CDPR earned this reputation of being a virulently pro-consumer, like friend of the people style company, almost entirely off the back of Witcher 3. That's my principal argument today. Because think about it, they did provide qualitatively founded DLC that was substantial, that gave you enough content and meaningful content for you to feel broadly, like the consensus was, it was worth whatever you paid for it. They provided scads of free quests and items and characters and quality of life improvements, and they did establish themselves as a studio to be perfectly willing to take steps to improve their games when they were launched and certain people weren't comfortable or weren't happy with certain aspects of how they played. So there's
Yep.
some merit there, but I think we also all need to remember it's based largely, when you think about the fact that CDPR is this like community darling, off of the performance and narrative surrounding a single game. A phenomenal game, but just one out of, what was this? Seven I just listed, or six I just listed.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that also what made them the community darling as well was the way that they communicated with the community. Because the way that they approach like their tweets, for example, all of their posts, you could really see that they live by the motto of like Razer, where when they say by gamers for gamers.
Yeah.
And that's what made them like the community darling.
Yeah, but you know who was also really liked by the community and was a lot of had a lot of pro-consumer politics? Blizzard. So you either die as Blizzard or live long enough to become Blizzard Activision. You know, give them enough time, they're gonna end up being a bunch of shitheads.
Well, to be fair, as I shared with you guys on a stream a few days ago, EA was at one point as well, if you can believe that. They were like, or at least sold themselves as an idealistic young upstart company, motivated by like surrounding themselves by the best and brightest young talent in the game and producing quality products that everybody could love. That was EA 20 some odd years ago. And so I think another key element in today's story is going to be the corrupting influences of publicity or celebrity and like simple finance. Because the CDPR we've seen over the past few years, and I'm talking about the leadership, not the people involved in development in the least, is
Definitely, yes.
they do not remotely reflect the values of the corporation as they've been presented to their audience.
So just a small disclaimer from now on, whenever we refer to CD Projekt
Yes.
Red, we are actually not referring to the developers. We are referring to the choices made by the management.
And in fact, I want to say thank you for reminding me, because I actually had this in my notes, but just too far down the list to see. Because obviously this is going to reach audiences worldwide, right? This is a massive program. Seriously though, just
Don't jinx us now.
on the record, thank you to everyone who has worked away, toiling themselves half to death and working themselves to the bone over the past 8+ years on the Cyberpunk 2077 project. All the developers, the artists, the writers, people who put themselves in a very, very difficult, adverse environment where they were routinely mistreated by middle management and the community alike to create something that they were passionate about and could be proud of. Seriously, thank you. You guys do not deserve any of the treatment you've been receiving from outside audiences or from superiors over the past few years. I think we are all united in saying we really, really appreciate your work and your vision. And we only hope that creatives and developers are allowed to work in humane conditions in the future, right? But yes, when we talk about CDPR, we're talking about like the leadership, the people who've been communicating with us through those ugly little yellow boxes on Twitter. So Cyberpunk 2077, or Cyberpunk 76, as I have it recorded in my notes, it released, it's hard to believe, just around 2 weeks ago, or a little under 2 weeks ago.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, right. It feels like one of those games like Kingdom Hearts 3, like Psychonauts 2, that the community based around the game or the developer have been waiting for ages, right? But I don't know about you guys. Before I sat down and did my research, I thought, like, yeah, it's been a few years, but I don't feel like this game was announced all that long ago, right?
Exactly. It feels like up until a year ago or so, there wasn't that much news about it. Like people were expecting it, but it wasn't like, oh, Cyberpunk, oh, Cyberpunk, oh, Cyberpunk. But then in the last couple of months, probably due to, everyone staying at home and not having anything smarter to do, people started pressuring, I guess CD Projekt Red, the developers, the management team about, hey, let's release this. Now is the time.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up, right? Because I thought, like, yeah, up until like people were done with The Witcher or completely enthralled by it in 2015, 2016, nobody cared about what the studio was doing, or to the extent that they would follow them this doggedly, right? But believe it or not, Cyberpunk actually started development in mid 2012.
I still cannot believe that.
Trust me, after playing the sucker for a week and a half, I can't either.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
I believe, if I had to guess, it's probably a Kingdom Hearts 3 scenario where an overwhelming amount of that time is spent like, or like a Mass Effect Andromeda situation, like this desperate dev team trying to throw something together while upper management or investors keep coming through and telling them, oh, no, start over. Like, we're doing this with it now.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, so they announced the start of development in 2012. Witcher 3, which is a huge game, came in 2015.
Yes.
The DLCs were coming out for the next 2 years. So basically, up until 2017, they didn't probably start properly with Cyberpunk, right?
Well, you're actually very, very close. So just some background. Obviously, the project is based on a popular Cyberpunk tabletop game, Cyberpunk 2020, or Cyberpunk Red, originally developed by a gentleman named Mike Pondsmith in 1988. It's very popular, as I understand it, in certain circles of geekdom. And Pondsmith began consulting on the project, like providing advice about world building and story and all of that, in mid 2012, which implies to me that like the project had been in the works internally a little bit longer than that. The game was announced, May 2012, and it did not enter pre-production until after or around the release of Blood and Wine in mid or late 2016.
It's normal because, I mean, Blood and Wine was an amazing DLC, so I can only assume that they put a lot of resources into it.
So this kind of gives us a big clue from my perspective, and that's, okay, there's nothing at all wrong about like having all hands on deck to create essentially a trilogy of Witcher 3 games, right?
Yeah.
But then why in the hell do you announce a game that you intend to be even bigger and even more ambitious 4 years before you assign a team to work on it full time?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's basically like saying, we are thinking about making another game in 10 years. Like, we'll let you know.
Right. That's something you expect from Bethesda. It's something you expect from the Kingdom Hearts crew, and I don't mean to disparage again the teams, but like the leadership, this is a bigger and bigger problem we see happening in, I think, AAA game development. People mismanaging the hype machine, like the marketing machine, because obviously you want to announce your game early enough to allow you a wide window within which to release promotional materials, right? Or send out demos to influencers or things like that, and get people very excited. So they'll not only want to buy the game, they'll want to buy like the super deluxe edition that costs like $300 and comes with like a branded hand towel or whatever, right?
I mean, let me just remind you about Blizzard and their announcement of Overwatch 2. They announced it at BlizzCon. I think it was last year or the year before. I'm not sure. People went crazy. 2 years ago. people went crazy about it. So it was really something that people expected, they wanted it, and then they went silent. Complete radio silence up until I think a couple of weeks ago when they said, "Oh, there is no news about it. We are gonna talk about it maybe at the next BlizzCon, like next year." So like at this point, just unannounce the freaking game.
Right, because from the inception of an idea to the successful release of a product in the AAA gaming space, anymore with the size and scale of games, it's easily, even for mid-range titles or mid-sized titles, like 4 or 5 years between the time that somebody sits down with a creative team and says, "Hey, we're going to try doing this," to getting a playable product that you can put in your console and actually works and won't crash every 15 seconds. Like Kingdom Hearts 3, like I think From Software with Elden Ring, but not to the same extent, it seems like CDPR announced the game the very second they started working on the concept or the project, like pre-production. Like, we're going to talk to Mike Pondsmith and get the rights. We're going to start thinking about what we want to do in this setting. Like, they weren't, and I don't say this disparagingly, it's just part of the process. They weren't actually creating anything like in an accessible, playable format at that time. Nowhere near. But people thought they were.
I'm just interested in how they exactly announced it. Did they say like, we're starting to work on this, we're working on this, or we're gonna make a game, or we're making a game? It's how you word it. If you say like, we're starting to work on it, we're still in the early stages, then yeah, fine. But still seems like way too early to say something.
Yep, absolutely.
Like telling someone, "Oh yeah, I'm building a house," and you've only maybe bought a plot of land, and then you're gonna start building in like 3 years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it seems like they just mismanaged their hype machine to such an extent that they, well, as we're going to see, they attracted that perhaps most toxic segment of the gaming community that will like start lobbing death threats at people and committing minor crimes and some major crimes if they don't get their video game and get it right now. And something we're quickly going to see as this story progresses is oddly appropriately for the setting of Night City, right? Aside from like the people busting their butts underneath the heel of an oppressive corporation desperately trying to stay alive, there aren't really any heroes here, just different shades of villain.
Yeah, I bet that all those people that send death threats are really, really sorry now.
Oh yeah. Well, no, they're not. They're just even angrier because now their game has a bug. And hey, like troubling representation of certain types of people or causing epileptic seizures, that's okay. But a bug? Oh, CDPR.
Oh no, my character is bald when I look in the mirror. That one time.
We jest, but this game is actually one of the most expensive of all time. It cost approximately 1.2 billion zloty, or 317 million US dollars.
Whew.
That is an expensive pile of crap.
Pretty much.
They expanded staff like exponentially to try to work on this. They opened like branch studios and configured brand new teams within CDPR. And of course, like so many studios do now, to help with the optimization of technology, they reached out to a bunch of other companies, like I think Nvidia was one of them, to consult on like the software, right? And how to get it to work successfully. Now, kids out there in the audience, there's one bit of this, like when I'm talking about tech, you may want to focus on that may jump out at you as a little odd. And that's that this game, which if you've been following Cyberpunk at all, you probably are aware runs quite poorly on PS4 Pro and like advanced models of Xbox One, and barely runs at all on base models.
Well, basically, as we said, we assume that they accidentally released the Switch port onto those consoles because that's basically how it looks and runs.
No, it looks like they released like the Commodore 64 port at certain points. But the question is, my question was, wait, if this thing was in development as of 2014 and they had serious efforts underway by 2016, why in the hell does it not perform more effectively on consoles that existed or at least were known of back then than it does on consoles that came out like a month and a half ago?
Because they probably didn't go the way that GTA 5 went, where they make the separate game for the PS3 and a separate game for the PC and the PS4. Literally, the PS3 version is a less featured version. it doesn't have as many features as the PS4 versions, but it runs well on the PS3. Well, runs at all even. But I think it would have been smarter for them to wait, maybe delay it like 6 months, mid next year, when most people already have like a PS5
Mm-hmm.
version, and just decided not to release the current gen consoles.
Yeah, I mean, I agree because the performance right now is so bad that it's giving them such a bad name, and they really do not need that. But like, there is also like the other end of the story. Like, if you look at Rockstar, they're basically releasing and re-releasing GTA on everything and their grandma. Like, soon we are gonna get a port on our toasters, and I really don't need that in my life.
Neither do I.
You mean kind of like The Witcher?
Kinda like Skyrim.
Exactly like Skyrim. It's on
Yeah,
Alexa.
but come on, they showed us like 2 seconds of a teaser for Elder Scrolls 6. You know, it's gonna happen one
You
day.
know it's just
Yeah,
gonna...
and it's not gonna be Skyrim.
No, it's just gonna be Skyrim again. They're gonna wait until we all forget and then just re-release it.
Skyrim 2 Electric Boogaloo.
No, it's going to the box art is just going to be that little silver dragon sigil, but like with a fake mustache. Here's the thing regarding this whole like release and optimization controversy that I don't understand. Like, I think they should have done the exact opposite, right? Since and obviously nobody could have anticipated that it would be so difficult to get one's hands on a 9th gen console. But since they were going to be released, at least initially, after or concomitantly with Cyberpunk, they probably should have poured their heart and soul into making sure the 8th gen versions worked like a charm, delay the next gen versions ever so slightly, which to the best of my knowledge was their initial plan before they ambitiously strove towards a universal launch, and ensure that, like, by the time many people would be able to or willing to access Cyberpunk on a PS5 or Xbox Series XS, they would be able to play a really robust version. But like right now, at the time of release, people were probably going to play either on a high-end PC, which is where the game performs best, unsurprisingly, or they were going to purchase it on an 8th gen console, like I did, unfortunately.
You misunderstood. The PS5 version and the Xbox Series X, right, versions aren't out yet. These are the PS4 versions that are running functionally on the newer consoles and not on
What?
the actual consoles they were. Yes, the PS5 version is going to come out sometimes next
So
year.
wait. So they still haven't released the next gen version, but the current...
No, it's gonna be a free upgrade when they make it, but it's not out yet. That's the horrible part. This is the PS4 version.
So that's the backwards compatibility doing its job, not the game.
Well, damn, I
Yeah.
can't wait to play the new version on the PS6.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that how the management was thinking is they wanted to release Cyberpunk together with the next gen
Yep.
consoles, which is the reason why they were like postponing the game. Like, oh, it's not finished, but the real reason was like, no, we want to release it together with PlayStation 5 and the new Xbox. But then, when they saw how much of a shitstorm getting your hands on one of those new consoles is, and they already postponed 3 times, they were like, oh, just toss it out, it's fine. It runs most of the time, it's fine.
No, I was going to say, I'm glad you guys brought up the delays, because I think prior to release, that was easily the most contentious aspect of the development process for many people. You have to remember, CDPR amassed a very, very substantial cult following after the release of Witcher 3. And that included both like passionate fans of nerddom such as ourselves, and also that most toxic subset of like what Jim Sterling would call the gamers TM. You know, the kind of exclusionary, like reactionary kind of xenophobes who get really, really angry at video games and video game developers, but even angrier at people who don't like their video games as much as they do, or dare I say, attempt to criticize them. Let's not forget the time that No Man's Sky fans DDoSed Jim Sterling's site after they published a totally fair review of it, because that will make the game better, as if it wasn't broken enough already. The delays surrounding Cyberpunk, I think, are the 3 simultaneous sequential delays were probably the aspect of development that agitated the most people, both within the normal fan base and kind of the more extreme, like, aggressive, toxic fan base, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
But if we look at these, Yes, the game being delayed 3 times is like a gut punch every time, especially since it was originally slated to release in early 2020, and with the ongoing pandemic, everybody wanted, like, some escapism, something really fun that they could throw themselves headlong into safely. But it was originally slated for release on April 16th, so quite a while ago, then delayed quite substantially to the 17th of September, with, I think, the first yellow tweet, which has
Oh
become
yes.
eponymous, or eponymous for CDPR. These little yellow tweets on the Cyberpunk account, which begin with "Dear gamers," go on to apologize for issues, sometimes explain issues, and then explain that you're all SOL. So
Yeah.
the first one dropped, and it was delayed to 17th September. Then only 2 months to 19th November, and finally delayed one more time for polishing to the 10th of December. Now, the interesting thing to point out is, if you look at it, from the 17th of September to the 10th of December, that is not a long delay at all, actually. But for the standards of AAA game development, like that last little span, right? And I think CDPR hurt themselves in the eyes of both fans and critics by, it seems like, constantly attempting to release the game or set the release date as soon as humanly possible, especially during a pandemic, which severely affected people's ability to participate in or complete work. And they kept disappointing people when they had to push it back, instead of saying, as they did some time ago, hey, we're going to let you guys know when it's ready and give it to you when we're totally confident in the product and proud of it.
Yeah, like my thinking is like, okay, that last delay from the 19th of
Yeah.
November to December, it's like it's just a couple of weeks, and now knowing how the game came out, what the hell did they do?
What did it look like before?
I'm
Why?
guessing they tried to do something but failed miserably. Because I think if they released it then as is, would probably make almost no difference to how it turned out, and maybe they would be less salty people. But I think Brady hit the point right when he said in the middle of a pandemic. I'm pretty sure if there was no pandemic, if people weren't locked in most countries, locked into their houses, unable to go out and do other stuff, I don't think there would be that much backlash at releasing a game that is bugged to all hell. Even though, like, it's not a terrible
No.
game. It's fun to play. It's just 8 years of hype does that thing when you
Yeah.
release a game like
And
that.
I
Yeah.
thank you for bringing that up, because we'll get into this, I suppose, in, I guess, the review portion of the podcast. It's not a bad game. Well, it is right now, but it's not overall. Its foundation is not rotten. But it's important to remember too, the big narrative that's emerged in the wake of the game's release, which we'll largely save for after the review, I suppose, is that CDPR's leadership and, like, their marketing team lied to and coerced critics and the general public alike in order to manipulate public perception of the game, because as early as, I want to say, January, they were reporting that the game was effectively complete and perfectly playable on 8th gen consoles. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I had my game crash when I tried to get out of my car at a standstill in an empty, like, little space with no NPCs around and nothing happening. Twice. And I don't want to think about what this game played like at the start of the year then. Like, if this is with, like, almost a full year of additional polish, what in the hell did it look like in January?
Yeah, so if you want to tell us what it did to your PC.
Yeah, so this is actually after, the patch that was supposed to improve PC performance, because at some point there were so many ugly crashes that it was starting to get quite unplayable, especially if you want to talk to your friends through Discord or any other communication service. So what my game did to me is that after a couple of hours of playing it, I started noticing weird lags, and I was like, okay, this is weird. I went into the task manager, checked all of my, like the CPU usage and stuff like that, and it turns out that the game was taking almost the entire 16 gigabytes of my RAM. And of course, my computer was like, no. So what it did, it crashed with like a nice blue screen of death. And then afterwards, I could not turn on my PC twice. Then on the third time, I managed to get in, and then the game started crashing again with, crashing the Discord for some reason, because always it would crash the game and then Discord at the same time.
It quick hacked you.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
I couldn't ask for reinforcements.
Yeah, for me, anytime the game would crash, and for me it didn't crash that often. But it usually crashed multiple times in a row, like during a quest, like 3 or 4 times. And every time it crashed, it wouldn't take my whole PC with it, but it did take Discord and pretty much anything connected to the internet. Just
Great.
gone.
So, like, of course, the game's still around, but all the things you can actually have fun with are gone.
Yeah, I'm just like
Yeah.
fascinated how it took down all the internet things, considering the game doesn't even have
Yeah.
multiplayer. It's like, you know what?
It's
You're not even
offline.
gonna, you're not gonna communicate with anyone. Like we don't allow that. It's single player, and you don't
No,
get to talk.
Aren't they going to add in like a multiplayer kind of online mode with microtransactions?
Yeah, it's going to be a free DLC as far as I've heard, so we are looking forward to that. But I'm assuming it's going to be something like GTA Online.
Yeah, they said they're thinking of it as a separate game. Like it's completely separate from the single player experience, kind of like Red Dead Online and Red
Right.
Dead Redemption 2.
So now we can expect a new standalone game with a new set of bugs.
Well, I'm think it's still gonna probably run on the same engine and the same like basic principles. Probably some stuff that is unable to like be implemented in a multiplayer like experience, like the time slowing down and all that other crap from the single player is not gonna be there. But I think it's essentially gonna be the same game. They just have probably a different team working on it, and they said it's not going to come out definitely next year, so probably 2022 for that.
Well, I hope they take their sweet time to actually make it playable. So, during all of these delays that they were having, I was always thinking to myself, like, it's fine. I would rather them, take their time and make a nice finished game rather than rushing like Ubisoft and then, releasing a game where NPCs' eyes are falling out of their sockets. But now knowing how Cyberpunk came out, I'm kind of afraid.
This game's a hell of a lot better than Watch Dogs 1, but the two last things, and we kind of touched on them both in your previous comments, I want to like briefly comment on before we jump into the review, is that firstly, this is important because I think the devs are our real heroes here. They went through hell during this entire process. CDPR infamously like kind of mandated like pan office crunch in the lead up to Witcher 3, and I think the DLCs as well. Is that correct? After they were outed for this, they issued what at the time seemed to be an extremely sincere apology and said they were going to improve their best practices for work-life balance and employee care in future projects, and promised in as many words that they would never do anything like that again, right?
So, considering that Mate and I are both software professionals, we know that if you constantly have projects like this that end up in you having to do, a last-minute crunch, there is probably something very wrong in your requirement assessment and your time management by your management.
Right.
So,
yeah, I have a like sort of a theory why this might have ended like it is. Like they announced that the multiplayer part of the game wouldn't come out till like about a year later, more than a year later, pretty late in like the development of the game. And they also pretty late announced the fact that it's gonna be like they consider it two separate games. I feel like they were, for the most of the development of the actual game, working on both those parts at the same time. And they figured, oh, we're not going to finish both of these on time, so let's just start working on the one.
So basically, they tossed out their multiplayer idea together with the QA process.
Yeah, I think that seems to be very likely what happened.
It's come to light. It did before launch, but the hardcore gamers TM entirely dismissed it as just attempts to, or a certain subset of them, as a series of attempts to defame like their new favorite developer, right? But that CDPR started mandating sporadic crunch and for Cyberpunk, and had been doing so off and on, like occasional 6-day work weeks for everyone, things like that. for the duration of the project effectively, but like this last year and change, it's been really really rough on them and more or less constant. They to be fair, like in the interest of full disclosure and equality, they did not do this in the way that like an EA style studio would or like Rockstar does. They did pay their employees a certain scale for overtime, but it was mandatory overtime. It was like every day, it was 6-day work weeks, and this was regular business that was expected of scores of people who worked on the game. And that, from both an ethical and a physiological perspective, is simply not the best practice for making this kind of project. It's not the best practice for running a workforce at all. But there was also the fact that like people in the lead up to Cyberpunk's release had a hell of a time getting their hands on review codes. We'll talk about that later. But suffice to say that CDPR handled this game, despite their like open and honest friend of the people persona, in a very secretive and kind of manipulative way. The leadership did, of course, and nobody suffered for this more than the devs, who actually, they themselves, the dev team now, received death threats in the wake of, I believe, each delay, but especially after the second one. And that is just abominable behavior. These people were already constantly, routinely being shit on by their bosses, and now the people that they're working for are doing the same because they want to take their time and give them something they can enjoy. That's
The death threats are an abominable behavior, not only by the gaming community, but also by us as human beings. Like, those are people that are literally, you know, working 6 days a week, giving up their lives, their families, just to be able to finish a game, to rush a game, so you can sit down on your ass and have something to entertain yourself.
Yeah, these are, I think so many people forget, video games are toys.
They're luxury items. You don't need them.
Oh, you do. When you're a 16-year-old with no friends and you're living in your mom's basement, you do need them, and that's why you make death threats, Seth. That's why.
Aye.
Right.
All right. I think now it's the right time to slide into our next portion, which is going to be a review of the game. So just a small disclaimer: this part is possible to have some spoilers. So in case you have not played the game, like, please don't do it yet.
So really quickly, how far or how much have each of us played? I think Seth, you kind of mainlined the main campaign your first time through.
Oh yes, I am now halfway through my second time going through the game.
I think I'm about like the third or half of the my first playthrough.
And I, for disclosure, am doing something a little different. I've completed the first of the game's 3 main story acts, which we'll talk about in a bit. Not exactly fantastic, but I've been exploring as much of the side content as I possibly can. So I've like nearly cleared out one district. I'm moving on to the next. The game has a lot of side content, like a lot. The vast majority of which, I think if you do it all, you could probably wring damn near 100 hours out of the game, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
I like the game's not terrible. It's an okay game. Like if you don't expect too much from
You
it.
just hit puberty.
Yes, thank you. Why? Thank you. Like I like the game. I just don't think I could like get lost in the game. Like I started playing the new WoW expansion, and honestly, I've enjoyed that much better, even though it's a time gated piece of shit. Anyways, like the whole game feels unfinished, and like if somebody like said this is an indie game, you know, then this game is like well made
Yeah.
for an indie studio. But this many people for, I guess, maximum of 8 years development, even though we know it most likely wasn't, it feels like terrible. Like the vehicle destruction is nowhere near to that of GTA. The vehicle controls are god awful. I've only ever used the bicycle, the motorcycle, because that's fine with maneuverability wise. The cars are just terrible to turn in and just drive them. But I do like how nicely they made the city. It's really unique. It's not like oh, we just took some assets and pasted them here and pasted them there, and we just scrapped it off from pre-made things. uh I think the NPC AI is lacking, because yeah, like in RPG games, usually if you block the path of an NPC, he will either go around you or say something or push you away. Here, they are like, hard objects. You can't go through them unless you're in their path, and then they'll just go through you. It's, it feels like, it doesn't feel like a
No,
AAA
no, it
game.
doesn't.
But the story is great. I mean, I like the story. I like the character developments. Keanu started off as a dick, but I kind of like his character now.
Okay, so I largely share Matai's impression of the gameplay, but my overall impressions going in, or my evaluation of the game, is kind of like the inverse. I found generally just playing around in the world that the devs had created and like the gameplay, the core systems, to be quite a lot of fun. Something like an immersive sim light, like think about a game like Dishonored or especially Deus Ex, the newer Deus Ex titles, that have extremely complex mechanics and ways that you and NPCs can interact with each other in the world. It's a simplified version of that style of design, intended to, I think, make questing and combat or navigation of hostile encounters, it's not always through combat, a little more expeditious, which suits what they're going for quite well. But I personally, from what I've seen of it, am not enthused by the story, and I kind of hate the protagonist with everything I have in me. I do like a good number of the side characters, and as we'll discuss later on, I think, and this seems to be the consensus among reviewers from publications as well, it feels almost like there are two entirely different stories here, or two entirely different writing teams. One focused on the principal campaign, intending to, more than anything else, set the dark, gritty, and dismal tone of Night City and of the setting. And I don't especially care for the writing, characterization, or pacing of the main story. That's another thing. In my mind, the main campaign is abominably paced, and we can discuss that in a little bit. But the side content, when the game allows itself to stop and breathe, and certainly not through your own character, because V, the protag, is a pile of shit most of the time, but allow you to explore auxiliary characters, people you meet associated with corps or gangs or different factions in the world, and really expand on their character the same way that, say, The Witcher 3 did with so many of the nobles of Skellige during the coronation quest lines. That's where the writing really shines, and the dev team, even through the terrible protagonist, are able to express a wide kind of swath of emotion and experience. And they're not all winners, but broadly speaking, the side jobs, as they're referred to in game, there's a ton of different types of side quests. There are these little police scanner missions, which usually involve you just roughing up some criminals or corporate guards. Lots of fun little encounters, but nothing story heavy. There are fixer missions, which follow one of a handful of archetypes, like combat or thievery or rescue, search and rescue, things like that, that have light individual stories, but nothing that terribly involves the player more often than not, but that are well written, I think, and fun. But the side jobs, the actual side missions in the vein of Witcher 3's side quests, are phenomenally done. Everything else, the vehicle physics feel a bit better on console than they must on PC. Maybe that's because the cars are probably moving at half the speed when they move at all. But there is a certain exhilaration, I find, to racing around Night City and seeing entire lines of traffic slowly load in 30 feet in front of you, or turning a corner and seeing a motorcycle flying horizontally through the air, perfectly static through a building. There is some fun to be had in the experience on console, but I guess my final opening comments are, I hate the soundtrack for reasons we'll discuss. It's very homogenous and kind of droning and not exactly expressive. But as Matai said, Night City, the world they crafted, was absolutely gorgeous when it did process and render graphically properly. It is a great environment to explore because every major district and every neighborhood within those districts had their own feel, their own look. Several of them look like they could be, realistically achieved in like major metropoli in the near future. So when it comes to actually building the world, I think the dev team did a great job. The game is just so unpolished, and I think the story was rushed to a certain extent that really hampers the experience. Oh yeah, and it doesn't friggin' work on PS4, so there's that.
All right, so I was one of those people that was really, really hyped for Cyberpunk ever since I finished Witcher 3. I was, waiting for the news and everything. I pre-ordered the game. I was like waiting so much for this game. I'm a big fan of the Cyberpunk fashion style, of the Cyberpunk idea. So yeah, I really had high hopes, and that's mostly my fault. So basically, my first hour in the game was just me going around the city and just observing, because I'm actually very interested in game design. So I wanted to see how those buildings looked like, if I could spot two NPCs that looked the same, if I could spot two stores that looked the same. And to my surprise, everything, well, like let's say 95% of the things were completely different, and it really felt like a city that's alive. And then the problem started. So I decided to go with Corpo because I don't know. I felt like that was the choice that not many people are going to make. So I wanted to see how that worked out. And I, of course, used my V button to whistle to Roach to come and pick me up. And to my surprise, Roach did not get stuck on the on the rooftops, but my car started coming slowly towards me, and as I was watching it ran down like 3 civilians. And I was thinking like, okay, nothing bad is gonna happen. I was thinking of GTA, where you sometimes run over people and they're just gonna, brush it off. Maybe you're gonna get some fine or something, and everything is gonna be fine. Well, not in this game. I got half of the nice city on my ass. I had drones following me, and I had the NCPD shooting my ass. So, yeah, I had to restart the game because also my save file failed. I was playing on the first couple of hours. So, and I gotta say that I was really pleasantly surprised with the world itself because it's really beautiful. Story wise, it was okay. So I wasn't impressed. It felt really, it felt it was just there, it was there as something to work towards too. And honestly, I was really looking forward to the moment that you meet Keanu, and I liked what they did with his character, as in what he actually is. But I feel like they really in the marketing part, they really abused his character to get more hype from the people, while what they did with the character in the game was not up to the same standard. And I genuinely feel that quite a lot of voice lines that were delivered by Keanu Reeves, that he felt really uncomfortable saying them, because like it really felt like it was written by a 13-year-old edgy teenager. And he's like, this cool guy and whatever. I mean, he does become better and better as you progress, but not as much as you would like him to be, like a normal human being. But yeah, and when it comes to the side missions, I actually like them. Like, I'm not in love with them, but I have this completionist bug in me, so I want to do every side quest, every gig, everything that I can find. And one thing that I really did not expect is that my favorite side quest would be the one where I'm saving a taxi service.
Oh, the Delamain missions.
Yeah, those are great. Those are pretty creative. Kudos to whoever wrote that quest line. It was really good. But yeah, that was basically my experience. Oh yeah, and maybe just to mention, on my second playthrough, I went with the Street Kid, and to my surprise, the only difference was the first 10 minutes of playtime, and everything else was exactly the same. And even up to the 6-month montage that they give you, it was always exactly the same.
But didn't they also pre-release really hype up the fact that, oh, each of these 3 origins is going to allow you to interact with Night City in a totally different way, when in reality it's like, oh, you get 5 bonus dialogue options throughout the campaign.
Yeah, exactly. You get those bonus dialogue options, which don't really help you in any way, because you could also get the same result by picking, I don't know, option number
when
3.
there is an option number
So
3. We'll get to that.
yeah.
Also, you mentioned the police, who, in my experience, don't even like GTA style spawn around corners and all that. They literally spawn out of thin air right around you.
Yes, for some
Yeah.
reason, it's first the drones. They're always the first ones, and then you turn around to run away from the drones, and the police is just there.
They're really good at their jobs. But also,
Yeah.
pre-launch, remember, CDPR promised everyone like an immersive, reactive, like wanted system in the style of open world games like GTA and Saints Row. And we did not get that at all.
No, I mean the gigs are all activated by you walking through the area, which is, of course, like fine. But those like criminal activity quests, the NCPD dispatcher and stuff like that. Firstly, they're boring. Secondly, they got me into quite a lot of trouble, because if you, for example, those missions where you have to save, one guy who is being harassed by a couple of bandits, if you accidentally shoot them before they notice you, the police is gonna come and shoot you down. Yeah, so you actually need to make sure that they see you first, start shooting, and only then can you shoot them and not get killed by the police.
10 minutes before we started this, I was playing and I did run into one of those situations, and I managed to stealth kill I think 4 of them out of 7 by not being stealthy. I just walked behind one of them, killed him, walked behind the other one, killed him. I didn't have the police on me, and then like the event triggered where it said like stop the crime or whatever.
Stop the crime.
And the other 2 started shooting at me, so I took out my katana and I just killed them. And the third one was just standing over a corpse, and I just stood behind him and I snapped his neck.
Yeah, you were very sneaky.
I've had a situation where, as Seth described, I helped the police after they got involved in a shootout with, I think it was like just some scavengers or something. Then they stood there, we all stood together for about 5 seconds. Then the police like started attempting to shoot me due to murder, even though I had like peacefully, non-lethally taken down all of the thugs in full view of the cops they were shooting at.
I've had one where I dropped a body of an unconscious person, and it turned into a puddle on the floor.
There is this moment. Act 1 concludes with this big heist on a corporate hotel that you've been building up to for several hours of, to be honest, decent, but again, not spectacularly written quests. And obviously there's this huge moment where you're like getting in to loot this item, and within, I would say, 7 minutes of playtime, after you've just been, questing and doing your thing in the one district the game will allow you to run around before that, 2 characters are revealed to be present in the game as really significant antagonists. Like, really, really central characters. And each of them are killed off probably less than a minute after they are revealed to be present in the game and working against you. The most powerful corporate officer in the world, I believe Arasaki Saburo, visits Night City and is established as a character extraordinarily well in this exchange with his son, and like who is another corporate officer. And he's then murdered before you get the opportunity to interact with him at all. And then Elite Fixer Dex Deshawn, a character I really like, relatively speaking, turns on you to get like corporate heat off of his back, shoots you and leaves you for dead. This is kind of how Keanu gets into the storyline later. And in the very next scene, after I think our first Keanu interlude, Dex is unceremoniously killed in front of you while you're powerless about 5 seconds into the cutscene. 2 segments happen effectively back to back with virtually no gameplay aside from a very brief interlude again as Keanu's character in between, and they very quickly establish several characters who had been present in the world and built up to be antagonistic, to be working against you, characters that you think you would want to be working against yourself for a certain portion of this campaign, and they're quickly taken off the board and replaced with like kind of a faceless corporate conglomerate for the next several hours of questing. And I think that's incredibly poorly written and very poorly paced writing. Keep in mind, too, this is bookended by, I would say, what would you guys say? A good 2 hour stretch where you cannot do anything at all. You're just basically watching cutscenes and holding up on the control stick. But that segment alone just turned me off of a main story I wasn't all that interested in anyway. And as Seth said, Keanu Reeves' character is pretty present throughout the game, and he turns in a solid performance when he's not having to read like the little edgelord lines. But on the whole, I hate his character, who, to be fair, is ostensibly a hero, and I hate the player character even more. Seth mentioned earlier how you don't really have like a choice insofar as determining like your character through your origin, right? As it happens though, friends, and this runs completely like perpendicular to CD Projekt Red's marketing, you don't really get that much opportunity to define your character by any means at all. See, in Witcher 3, you were working with a protagonist who was not your avatar. Geralt of Rivia was an established character in Polish fiction for, upwards of 30 years at the time of the first game's publication, or around 30 years. By the time of Witcher 3, he'd been in games for almost a full decade. Like, he was an established character. But you could still, like, choose to resolve quests or interact with NPCs, sometimes 5 or 6 different ways for singular quests? In Cyberpunk, you are afforded choices that can allow you to depict your character as, say, a paragon or a renegade, right? A hero or like an anti-hero or something like that. But they're always very sparing with that, and none of them have any lasting impact on the way your character develops or expresses themselves, or the way other people out in the world react to you or know of your reputation. Those instances where that does happen feel extremely scripted and kind of like simple, which is weird because the marketing said like, you are this character, you are V, you get to customize everything about them, but oftentimes
But Brady, they gave you the greatest choice of all, and that is the size of your penis.
Yes, but on certain platforms they didn't give me the choice as to whether or not I want
Also,
it in my
if you want
pants.
penis 1 or penis 2.
The issue is oftentimes you're given 2 dialogue options, right?
Mostly, yeah. And then C
A
usually
question.
is the
Yeah. And usually, appropriately enough, those dialogue options are tantamount to saying the same thing with different levels of vulgarity. So you're not deciding whether you want to be kind to
Yep.
this person or be abrasive, be trusting, or be doubtful. You're choosing whether you want to be penis 1 or penis 2. I'm so good at telegraphing my humor. But that was the thing, and has been the thing consistently that's bothered me the most. I can't choose half the time whether or not to be kind or be how I interact with people in this world. My character is largely defined for me, and that character is a cynical, nihilistic, aggressive, vulgar dirtbag 90% of the time. Sorry, that's all I have to say about characters and story. Anything else you guys want to add?
Literally, you can play this character any way that you like, as long as you play it the way we like it. It's like it's an illusion of choice, and it's a terrible one.
I guess the next point would be to talk about like general like gameplay and world design, and I think this is where the game is strongest, believe it or not.
Well, that depends on which aspect you're looking at, because, for example, my second playthrough, I'm trying to go as a full stealth character. And I'm having a blast, mostly because I've noticed that I can literally, make as much noise as I want. Nobody's gonna notice me. I can dance kan kazachok macarena in front of the guy as long as his eye meter doesn't fill up, and then just close the door, and he's gonna be like, oh, I guess it's just the wind. Like, you can run in front of them and they're not gonna notice you as long as their eye meter doesn't, fill up. So,
Or if you turn their eyes off.
Oh yeah, you can turn their eyes off, of course.
Yeah, but take into consideration, most of those people are like not very rich, so they probably have like either used or badly made cyberware. So it's like, oh, damn thing's glitching again. Yeah, there's some dude with penis too, like hanging out of his pants. Just
my optics can only see penis 1 people.
To be fair, though, the game does give you a variety of different like skill trees, each corresponding to a playstyle. Like And amazingly, for a game like this, where there's melee combat and stealth and ranged combat and like just bare knuckle brawling and something special to well, kind of special to Cyberpunk, a like cyberware hacking based playstyle that involves, say, remotely controlling cameras to tag enemies on your map or through your field of vision and disabling enemies' optics so they can't see you, or electrocuting enemies, or somehow causing like their implants to leak poisonous chemicals into their bloodstream because that's how that works. There, all of those playstyles feel viable and fully fleshed out. Um, like I based my playstyle largely around stealth and quick hacking, but I found melee in a game like this where everybody's got a gun is surprisingly effective as well. Like all of these playstyles feel balanced and fun.
So right now, like whenever stealth fails me, I have my trusty Betty, which is the baseball bat, which for some reason does an insane amount of damage, and I'm just like just bumping everyone on their heads.
Yeah, I told you why that works, right, Seth? It's because uh, percussive maintenance works well on electronics.
I was impressed with how versatile all the different playstyles feel, and the fact that when I'm removed from the story, I'm just running around like in an open world game, like think of GTA or Sleeping Dogs. It's a lot of fun. Combat feels punchy and fun, better than Witcher by a hair's breadth, I would say. What do we think about the perks themselves? These little buffs you can purchase in each stat skill tree as you level up.
To me, the perks are not that impressive. Like, they're a nice little addition, but the cyberware is really nice. I am having a lot of fun with that.
Right. The perks for those of you in the audience who are unaware largely take the form of like percentage based stat increases. So like, oh, you move 25% faster while crouching or in stealth, or you deal like 30% more damage with headshots and so on and such. Um very few of them, like the others said, feel like they changed the game. Like very few of them unlock brand new abilities or give you additional forms of extant abilities. Like, surprisingly, the stealth skill tree is based almost entirely around poison damage instead of, being stealthy and undetectable. So, not all of them are great, but there are some that you would be able to get, like back in Witcher 3, that were super useful, like increasing equip load or carry weight, the speed at which you move through the world overall. Some of them they're nice, but none of them feel essential.
Which is the great part. I don't like it when you feel like you need to level your character all the fucking time just to get something out of it. Because they're not just like you can pick those perks, you also have to level that skill tree till you can unlock that perk.
You've got to run and jump and do parkour or beat people up, which is my go-to.
Well, that's still much better than driving the car, so I run everywhere. Like, even if it's slower, I just run. So, yeah, most of my experience has been putting points into, like, what is it called? Technical and intelligence. And that's mostly because I want to, hack stuff and
Yep.
I want to open doors that I'm not supposed to open.
Yeah, but like, can we just go to the part where you need technical ability to open doors, and all you do is just the door opens. Like, you have so much technical skill that the door just opens without you doing anything.
The door acknowledges your determination.
Yeah, and like with the one where you need strength, you actually do like pry the door open.
In that regard, there's one more thing I kind of want to pivot to, and that's factions and the world. I think we've all mentioned at this point we think that the world itself, like the districts and environments as a whole, like feel really cool. But they're each supposed to be characterized further by corporations and gangs that kind of make their home there, right?
Yeah, I felt like they like it's no difference whether you side with them, agree with them, disagree with them, want to work with them, just want to kill them on sight. Like they're all pretty much the same.
I feel like you don't get nearly enough chances to actually interact with the gangs in a non-hostile way to actually characterize them properly.
I don't know. I do believe that they intended to like make them more like diverse and actually to maybe have some sort of effect on the world. Because like if you've played Fallout New Vegas, you actually have several big factions which you can side with. Like in a game which is like not like you said, an established storyline like The Witcher, where you're supposed to be
Right.
making your own destiny. I feel like you should be able to go, oh, I don't want to be one of the good guys. I want to side with Arasaka and just conquer the world with them.
And I think something that probably could have benefited the game as well would have been, and now to be fair, I don't know if you guys have come across these yet, but I talked about how some of the side gigs feel kind of one note and bereft of choice earlier. Some of them, to be fair, do branch out into quest lines in their district later on, like little simple ones, but there are like chains of quests there. And those are generally pretty good, but I feel like the game probably would have benefited from like having neighborhood or at the very least district specific like big overarching quest lines instead of like a couple dozen little street crimes to stop. That way you could get immersed in the feel of a neighborhood, meet unique characters, interact with the gangs and corporations there in ways that feel unique and fleshed out, and really get a better feel of Night City.
Yeah, and possibly like if you go into this district and you start like let's say you're doing a quest where you're killing
Right.
the local gang, you kind of feel like if you went far enough into that quest line, the local gang would not like you. They would attack you on sight there, or like the citizens would be like, oh hey, there's that guy who keeps saving people here.
Oh no, the monster.
The NPCs, the citizens, aren't really
Yeah.
very like interactive. They're just like mostly have what, like 50 simple voice lines where you just randomly get a voice line from them. Nothing else.
And it's always an asshole voice line. It's like, what the fuck are you looking at?
Yeah, watch where you're walking, Penis 3. It honestly feels a bit like an open world game that probably could have come out a bit before GTA 5 at certain times.
But I gotta give it to them. They made the
Yeah.
ending, like my experience of the ending, very memorable because for some reason the game has decided that I don't deserve to have clothes on. So I, just like invaded the Arasaka Tower with my vagina, just, being out for show and not having any hair. I did have all of the armor bonus that my equipment gave me, but it was just not visible, and there was nothing that I could do. So that ending was brilliant.
No, you were just wearing the generic MMO female armor. The less it covers, the more it protects.
And I would say, moment to moment, if you strip out the story and the narrative and character interactions, the game, when it works, is a better game, like from a purely mechanical standpoint, than Witcher 3 was. If you add back in world building and character and narrative and the reason people buy these kinds of games, it's orders of magnitude worse. One thing I kind of wanted to ask you guys about, since you've had time now, is this is just the entertainment industry family and me coming out. How do you feel about the game's like sound design, not just the soundtrack, but like the atmospheric music and ambience and all that?
I don't know, like it seems to be like, again, soundtrack aside, that the other parts seem fine, like the sound wise and everything. But yeah.
I mean, you have the choice between death metal, grunge metal, power metal, 30 different subgenres of metal and 30 different subgenres of EDM, electronic
Grungy
music,
sound.
but all of them have this, noisy undertone, It feels like they want you to feel the dystopian feel of the Night City in their music.
Yeah, and it's all mostly just instrumental. I do like some lyrics in the music I listen
I don't
to.
mind if it's just instrumental, if it can actually be, part of the background, but it's just so obnoxious at times that you just cannot ignore it.
So there's a couple things for people who aren't familiar with the game, and I think this is important because a lot of people obviously play games to relax and immerse themselves. And from a purely sonic standpoint, this game does not allow oneself to do that very often because, as the others have said, the soundtrack is both omnipresent. You are hearing music everywhere you go. All of this music is constantly blaring, and as Seth said, it's about 87 different types of metal, and some, not even EDM, but like very, very heavy, bassy, oppressive, like trance and house music. The game's combat music, by the way, like one of the 2 combat tracks that plays whenever you get into action, is horrifically obnoxious.
Yeah.
It's like this drum and bass, screechy sounding thing that just drives me up the wall. And the problem is both aesthetic and narrative, I find, because yes, I will state openly, I like lighter, like dancey EDM pop well enough. It's not my go-to. I hate the heavy stuff used in the game, and I also am not a fan of heavy metal whatsoever. If that's your preference, I think you can find some things in the game you really like. But there's like 2 kinds of music in the game, 2 pretty specific genres, and everything else is relegated to usually singular appearances on the soundtrack. I want to say there's like
So my opinion about the soundtrack basically is that it absolutely fits the Night City. So that is really the noise of the city that never sleeps, the city that is completely like dystopian, destroyed, filled with people who are basically more robots than human. Everyone is an asshole. Like that is the music that I expect. And like what saddens me is that I am the target audience for that type of soundtrack. Like I am a metal fan, I am an electronic fan, and I still hate it. Like it was fine for the first hour, but after playing like I don't know 30 hours and listening to that music constantly, I found myself turning off the radio every time I invade like a bandit camp or something.
Oh, God.
First thing that I do is I search for the radio and turn it off.
Right, because every time you see enemies in the game, they inexplicably have 3 or 4 radios strewn about like the back alley they're in, playing one of the metal stations every time.
And they're all in sync. Like you turn one off, and for some reason the music is still going.
Yeah, also like I've played both with the copyrighted songs on and off, and like I was expecting when they said copyrighted songs, I was expecting maybe something still metal but more mainstream. But I honestly couldn't tell a difference between if I had it copyrighted off or on. Oh, somebody listening to this who is a video game modder, please make a mod for Brady where there's a radio station with just Viper
The sound of the
songs.
future.
I would actually like to basically say that this game represents 2020 fully. Like this year has been crap, and this game just followed its example.
Yeah, it'll be a great game when it's finished.
I think in its current state, you would be extremely ill-advised to purchase it on a current-gen console, not something that's like next-gen. And apparently even people on PC are having issues, but I think if you wait maybe 3 to 4 months, you'll have something far more manageable that will give you a good time, provided you go in with tempered expectations regarding the story and world and the impact you can have on it. The best way I can think about this game myself is as an open world pseudo-immersive sim, kind of in the style of Deus Ex meets Sleeping Dogs. And if you approach the game with that mentality in mind, instead of as this great narrative successor to The Witcher, you can have a lot of fun, imperfect fun, but fun nonetheless. Destructoid presently gave it a 7.5 out of 10, and I would say somewhere between that and an 8 when it's completely done would be fair, probably.
Considering how many hours I've put in, considering it's not even finished, I would go with even higher, maybe also like 9 out of 10 when it's finished.
I will say this, I think the DLCs and the expansions and the fixes that come between have the opportunity using this as a base to be something really special still.
Like the world is amazing and there is so much more they can do with it, so I just hope they are gonna take the opportunity and actually do something.
Yeah, I mean, if they go by their Witcher tradition, this was a complete train wreck. The second one is probably going to be not so memorable but good, and the third one is going to be like great game of the year. We're all going to love it. So,
Yeah, basically, it's gonna be Cyberpunk 4077, and it's gonna be great.
My favorite comment on I think it was Destructoid I've read about this game so far said, "See guys, this is what happens when you release a game 57 years early."
Yeah, there were some other jokes like Cyberpunk 2077. That's not the title, that's the release date.
I like Cyberpunk 64 accompanying images of like characters with absolutely no textures loaded.
There is one YouTuber that I really like watching. His channel is Spawn Wave, and he basically does daily news about the gaming industry. And he said one sentence that I'm never going to forget, and that is Cyberpunk's release was so bad that for the next 30 seconds, I'm actually going to praise Avengers.
Oh my god. That's true though. Like, Avengers worked at launch. It wasn't great, it wasn't even good, but it worked.
It worked. That was it, period.
So Cyberpunk, if you look online, if you look like at its Metacritic, depending on different consoles, it's different, but it is sitting abysmally presently with critics and fans alike. The PS4 versions, like I think, well within the yellow zone, and the for critics, and solidly in the red, like on a 2.5 or whatever from fans. The problem here is that if you look at the scores from the major publications, the ones that had to work with CDPR to earn their credentials or their access keys, they are almost uniformly glowing. Because in advance of sending out review codes, CDPR's leadership engaged in a series of duplicitous and coercive practices intended to tailor the initial wave of reviews to be as positive as is humanly possible for a game that, I must remind everyone, they had to be perfectly aware was not ready for release on several platforms. And could we argue as well, since you guys have been playing it on that platform, arguably the state it was in at launch, not quite ready for PC?
Depending on your like computer, and I'm thinking the reviewers, the early reviewers, did not get the
Mm-hmm.
complete game. I think, like with all the bugs and everything, I think they might have given them just a partial game with everything ironed out as
Well,
much as possible
interesting you
for the
say that,
parts they let them play.
because in the wake of the Cyberpunk shitstorm, one reviewer, I believe it was for Bloomberg or Forbes or one of those publications, issued this very, very long kind of op-ed explaining the entire review process and what it was like working with and around CDPR leadership, and how it more or less forced them to mislead their audience. They said the following, in brief, I'm paraphrasing. Several months prior to launch, as is custom, CDPR started reaching out to people and saying, hey, we're looking to send you a review code when the game is ready. We can send it to you on your choice of platform: PC, PS4, Xbox One, PS5, Series X, whatever. And like they were not sending these codes out, but they were saying, we will, right? We will. And months later, when they actually sent review codes out, they reached out to a smaller number of individuals or organizations and would only give them codes for the PC version. Moreover, a very strict review embargo was placed on the game, mandating that reviewers only use, if they were going to include a video component in their review page, only use pre-approved B-roll from CDPR that they recorded themselves, which I have been told is a fairly standard practice, shady though it is. Nothing wrong with that, right? Like maybe they don't want to spoil you on something or what have you. But also that they were told, ordered even, not to mention any bugs, glitches, or technical imperfections that they discovered in the game during their play for review. They could not mention it.
I mean, that would explain kind of how the public reacted afterwards, and also now with all of the news about the class action.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really, really an unfortunate thing for the developers, to be honest.
Of course, because these poor people who had been crunched for off and on for years, now their bosses, instead of taking this on the chin for themselves, are going to throw them back in the trenches and work them to death trying to fix this. But what do we think about this? What do we think about the conditions under which they ordered people to review this? Because I believe, in addition to the fact that the big name companies, your IGN, your GameSpot, are typically more forgiving of big budget games so they can retain access, they also probably inflated their review scores, assuming that would be appropriate for the product when it was fixed, since they couldn't say this is a broken POS right now.
I mean, this is basically censorship in its purest form.
Of course.
Yeah, like like bug wise, bugs aren't the end of the world. Bugs are usually fun if they're not game breaking and they don't crash your entire PC. They're usually like funny. Oh, look at this T-posing guy just standing talking to an NPC. Oh, an NPC ran into me and I flew away like I was hit by a truck. Funny, not that bad. It's gonna be fixed eventually. But this amount of bugs and like saying you can't mention anything, whereas you could say, well, we were given this pre-release
Sure.
version without the day one patch that was, mind you, 50 gigabytes. Can you imagine what the
Well,
game
wait,
was
on
like
one
before
platform,
that?
I think it could have been PS4, wasn't it literally unplayable?
Also, I do believe the PS4 versions ended up in like players hands like weeks before the actual release.
That's right. Well, no, they leaked. Certain copies leaked.
Yeah, and CDPR was like, don't stream any of it because we might DMCA you. I'm like surprised no one was like, I'm not gonna stream it, but I tried it and it's a piece of shit.
Remember, so many of the gamers TM like needed this game to be great, and they were willing to do
Yeah.
anything necessary, probably surprisingly more than they would do for anything else, to ensure that it was great, even if it wasn't. To the point that, get this, a reviewer for a certain publication, her name is Liana Doherty, mentioned that at launch, the game's brain dance jack in sequence, which is a series of very bright flashing lights and sounds and all that, induced an epileptic seizure in her during play. And this is the type of thing that is absolutely unacceptable. Again, we're talking about entertainment, we're talking about toys. This is not something that you casually let your product do to someone. And the response from multiple avenues was, in my mind, abominable and something that disgusts me to my core. CDPR's team responded rather blithely that, well, if you actually read our EULA, including the bit, this bit at the very start where we make jokes about the fact that nobody reads these or really, cares, we mentioned that can happen, so good luck. And because she, in a positive review, okay, Miss Doherty liked the game. She liked it a lot. I think she gave it a 9 or whatever. She might have been the IGN reviewer. She mentioned that this game caused her physical harm, which to me is grounds for, like, I would say no review score whatsoever, right? Because this isn't a matter of entertainment. This isn't a matter of fun. This is something very serious that could have had a long lasting effect on somebody's life and livelihood. In response to that, scores of people on Twitter tagged her in with GIFs and videos flashing light patterns designed to induce seizures in epileptics.
Actually, an ex coworker of mine, not so long ago, her daughter
Mm-hmm.
died from an epileptic seizure while she was home alone. So that is
Yeah.
horrible. Imagine some kid playing the game and I've seen the warning, like at the very beginning of the game there's a warning, might induce epileptic seizures. It's a pretty big paragraph
No.
of text that is not on the screen long enough. There should be like a giant warning sign for like 10 seconds that says this game might induce epileptic seizures. Also, the whole brain
Mm-hmm.
dance thing, the startup with the flashing lights, is so very similar, as I think even she stated, the reporter, to the actual test for epilepsy, where they do in a
Yep.
controlled environment induce a seizure in you.
I don't know what they were thinking, but I can't believe that the people who marketed the product effectively tell not just this woman, but people like her that it's their fault. And then the public's response to, again, somebody sharing their concern and trying to help other people with similar conditions stay safe, right? Which is what we should all be emphasizing right now more than ever, is to, and I've heard in certain jurisdictions it is defined thusly when you attempt to induce seizures in people, in even remotely, physically assault her. It's just abominable behavior, and so many of these were the same people who were furious at CDPR over delays and bugs.
Those people are assholes.
Right, sure. Asshole number 4, to be specific.
Yeah. Anyways, I wanted to say that I personally don't suffer from any epileptic seizures. I don't have any motion sickness either. But I
Mm-hmm.
have noticed that I cannot play the game for a longer period of time because it it induces serious headaches.
Yeah, like there's film grain and a number of other like visual effects intended to like kind of evoke a certain style, and all of them simultaneously, like film grain and motion blur and all that, can be a bit much.
So I would say, like, I mean, of course, some
Yeah.
people are gonna say, like, oh, you're not supposed to play video games for a longer period of time, anyways. But I'm talking about a period of not even 2 hours, which is
Yeah.
not a problem with any other game, but just the combination of the the lights, the graphic style, as you said, like the great film grain thingy. Also paired with the music choice, it's just so headache inducing that I just cannot endure it for a long time. Let's now switch to some other news that we know came out after the release, because just
Yes.
the epilepsy scandal, so to say, now the class action for false advertising.
Mm-hmm.
There also, don't forget the Sony pulling it out of their stores, which
Right.
caused the stocks to plummet in their value, and I was one of the affected people, unfortunately.
So yeah, this is super important. After the game launched, people were incensed. Not only like PC again wasn't great, but if this was on any console at launch, including I think ninth gen, it was barely playable. And so Cyberpunk's team issued one of their trademark yellow apologies once again, saying, just to quote the first bit about disclosure: "Dear gamers, first of all, we would like to start by apologizing to you for not showing the game on base last gen consoles before it premiered, and in consequence, not allowing you to make a more informed decision about your purchase. We should have paid more attention to making it play better on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One." First off, what the hell were you doing for 8 years?
Yeah.
Secondly, they say that they would love to offer refunds to anybody who's dissatisfied with the game and won't give it a chance. That they could refund the copy, and they then tell people, "Hey, go ask Microsoft or Sony for a refund if you're dissatisfied and on console. We'll help as like the vendor of last resort if they can't help you." But so they throw all these people onto Microsoft and Sony's customer service lines, right? And those corporations do not appreciate this at all. They're basically, because they say here something to the effect of, right, "Oh, don't worry, those guys will give you your money back." So as a result, Sony ain't playing around. I believe the next day, they pull the game from the PlayStation Store, citing it, being completely unworkable. Like, this is not fit for our storefront at present, essentially. And they pull it unilaterally. CDPR, I think, had a conversation with Sony, but they did not ask for it to be pulled. So Sony plays hardball, and Microsoft does not pull the game down, but does start processing refunds as well. Sony does too, of course. And they now have a disclaimer, I think, right on their digital storefront just for Cyberpunk, making people aware of the state of the game. So, like, this game sold like hotcakes, but we have to think, as I think the YouTube gaming news expert Yongya stated a couple days ago, we will never know the figures for returns or refunds, because what corporation wants to release those statistics, right? But it's safe to imagine, right? They are losing a very large chunk of the money and the sales they just made.
Not like, I don't think in this case the money is also the big problem. I think that the biggest problem is they lost faith. Like,
Yes.
people don't trust them anymore, and like also the way that they handled the situation afterwards was not good. Like, you cannot just send out a yellow tweet apology and be like, oh, we fucked up, but like, just return it, it's fine.
Moreover, all these apologies have carried the tone of, "We're sorry you're upset, but we're not going to do anything to amend our behavior or practices."
Yeah, like Hello Games with No Man's Sky, at least they did go quiet for like months, but then they just like redeemed themselves. They weren't giving non-apology apologies, like, we're sorry, but not really, or no, we're sorry you didn't like it.
I'm very sorry that you're upset.
A tiny indie studio who were punching way above their weight class, and I say this as somebody who's not overly fond of No Man's Sky, even as it is now, they put their money where their mouth was and turned that project around really effectively. The problem with CDPR, well, it's only gotten worse, right? Because in the ensuing fallout, they've had to process refunds. They threw a bunch of people onto Microsoft and Sony. They are bleeding from every pore, more or less, right? Apparently, well, no, I know for a fact there are I believe, two different class action lawsuits in the works in Poland, uh, attempting to take CDPR and their leadership to task for duplicitous, false marketing practices. In other words, marketing, selling, promoting a product which is not remotely what they were actually giving people. It's a class action lawsuit. I think anybody can jump on board, right? First one, the big one, is being led by one of CDPR's own investors and a very prominent Polish attorney. So when you've got one of your own people, one of the people profiting from your company, trying to take you to court, yikes.
I honestly felt like I really wanted to refund the game because I do not want to give CDPR my money.
You're not alone in that regard. Like, everybody has lost faith in these, again, the leaders, not the devs. The devs I have all the faith in the world in, and I think they did a remarkable job with terrible work conditions in very little time. But people lost faith in the leadership of this company, and rightly so. It's come out, right, in the week plus following the game's release. Not only did investors lay into CDPR leadership over the terrible job they did with the launch, but, like, their own staff, the CDPR dev team and staff, are justifiably at this point friggin' furious because they were worked to the bone. They were, like, put in an abusive work environment, effectively, to release a game that was going to be like their magnum opus, right? And then their leaders, who did not have their hands on the project, forced them to release it in a shoddy condition, like it was all for nothing. This is my favorite bit. In a meeting between leadership and devs, purportedly, one of the dev team members asked the leadership something to the effect of, don't you think it's kind of hypocritical to make a game about a cyberpunk dystopia where corrupt corporations abuse people and, like, lie to the entire world when you've been running this project as you have? And apparently, quote, their response was vague and non-committal.
Oh, nice. They nodded silently.
I am thrilled for whoever that was. I'm proud of them. It takes guts to talk to your boss like that, and they deserve it, right?
Yeah.
But also, one of the CDPR or CD Projekt studio owners, I think, or studio heads, as recent as yesterday, was liking loads of tweets criticizing Sony for pulling the game. So there's that.
Oh, there was also a lot of, like, complaints from people who refunded the game with Sony and Xbox, and I refunded the game, but why was the game removed from my console? Like, you fucking dumbass. Yeah, like, it's not like you're unsatisfied so you can keep playing it but get your money back.
Right.
That's not
Like,
how it works.
And of course, these same people, I think the hashtag real gamers, they're somehow still angry with, like, the companies and critics and the general public instead of CDPR, right? And I don't think there's anything substantial we can say to that other than it's a damn shame. But this kind of fallout, I think, is well deserved, and I can only hope that CDPR as a corporate entity learns from it.
Yeah, that's kind of like the problem when you have shareholders and publishers riding down your neck when they're like, you need to release this. People are angry. We're gonna lose money if we don't release it now. It's the holiday season. That's the best time to release something because kids are gonna wanna get that as a present and stuff like that. But on the other hand, if you don't have that, you have Star Citizen, which is probably never gonna get released, but keeps getting money. The game is really in early access. Wait for it to be fully released before you buy it. That's my opinion. Thank you.
I really just am overwhelmed by the fact that I've got a decent enough game to, like, while away the last months of quarantine with, but I am genuinely appalled at the material and the human cost that its production incurred, and I hope beyond hope that people in positions to take action to ensure that this isn't the way a workforce is treated, this isn't the way human beings are treated in the future, are able to take those steps and ensure that CDPR's incredibly talented team of developers, artists, and creatives are able to continue giving us works of the quality they aspire to and achieved with Witcher 3 in future in a more open and productive and happy and healthy work environment. I don't particularly adore what I've got in my hands, but I know that what people had to go through to create it is 1,000 times worse. So all of my thoughts are with them.